Dr. Newsome, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
When you and your colleagues around the world talk about untold human suffering if climate change is not addressed, what do you mean by that?
Well, I guess if you look at the data over the last 40 years, it doesn't paint a great picture. And under a business as usual approach, things like extreme climatic events, big floods, big rains, long wound out droughts, are likely to be possibly more frequent and more extreme. Globally, we've also got increases in sea level rises, which is inundating island communities as well. And together, those events are not great for human health and well-being.
Okay, and of course, one of the things you want all governments, including Australia, to do is fast-track the transition from fossil fuels to renewables. How, practically speaking, how quickly can that happen, or would you like it to happen?
Well, a lot of these emergencies or these climate warnings have been given for a long time now. I mean, some of the first warnings were given over 40 years ago, and we've tracked the data over the last 40 years, and it doesn't paint a great picture. We need to act now. It's not too late to act, but really we need to get moving. Greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise despite all the warnings from scientists. But really, the movement needs to be at a global level. So every country has a responsibility to act and also to meet some of the international agreements that they have signed up to.
And speaking of the international agreements, the Australian government is confident it will meet its commitment under the Paris Accord of up to a 28% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030. In your view and in the view of your colleagues around the world, is that enough?
Well, it may be enough, but I guess we'll wait and see. What we'd really like to see, though, is governments using the indicators that we've reported in our paper. The indicators we put there are quite broad and track all of the different things that are interlinked with climate change. And I think these broad indicators can help governments to paint a picture about how they are dealing with the threat of climate change. Ideally, these indices and indicators would be reported back to the government, even at monthly levels. It would be great to see it on 7:30 News or 7 o'clock news reported back to the community how we're tracking in terms of forest loss, greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. And if they are putting in the right policies and if they are putting in the right steps, then we should see the trajectory of those graphs changing in a positive way.
Okay, would you like to see countries around the world go for a target of zero net emissions by 2050?
I mean, the target or the emission target is going to be debated. Ideally, we'd have a world where renewables are the primary source of energy. We outlined 6 kind of critical key steps that we think are necessary to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And top of that list is a switch or a move away from fossil fuels to using more renewable energy sources. But we also need to factor in the other things like meat production, forest loss, and things like that. And also, one thing that really isn't considered in detail when talking about climate change is human population growth. And we need to factor in human population growth when thinking about the policies and government directions in dealing with climate change.
Okay, yes, and that is one of the points, and you talk about with your colleagues managing the growth of population through what you describe as social and economic justice. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I guess a lot of the indices and the metrics of a country's success are based on GDP and economic growth. What we'd really like to see is governments and policymakers focusing on human health and well-being and also social justice, so that both developed and developing countries have happy and healthy people who can live a long life, and that their future generations can have a long and happy life on planet Earth, which is really our only home.
And is that better achieved in your view if countries around the world, including Australia, aim to limit their populations, keep a lid on their populations?
Well, one of the encouraging signs in our paper is that at a global level, fertility rates are declining, but populations are increasing dramatically. And sure, where there's in some countries where the population growth is really high, there may be room there for other countries to support some of that population growth. But ideally, in terms of limiting population growth, we need to provide education and really birth control and education tools for developing countries to further reduce their fertility rates and birth rates.
Thomas Newsome, so much to talk about in this landmark report released overnight. Thank you so much for joining us on News Breakfast.
Thank you.